Hello, everybody. Nelson Virtual here with a program for wellness restoration. I'm very excited today. We have a true hero of the community, not only the LGBTQ community, also the HIV community.
Well, thank you so much, Nelson, for giving me the opportunity to chat with you and to get this information out to so many people who we hope will make use of it. What we found here in Massachusetts was this all started when people who'd been denied coverage for lipodystrophy by insurance companies came to me and wanted to appeal. And what we found, what I learned from that was, number one, people were really suffering profoundly, that this was one of the invisible, really under-recognized and underappreciated issues of the epidemic, I think for a number of reasons. What we also found was that if you get a lawyer and threaten to sue an insurance company, you can get coverage for some people, but we realized very quickly we needed systemic change. And so we have also the good fortune of having some very progressive and supportive legislative allies in Massachusetts. But in the beginning of this whole process, this was an issue that nobody understood. I don't think there was one legislator in Massachusetts who had heard of the word lipodystrophy. And so we put together this coalition, and I think the most important thing that we did in passing this law, and that I would recommend to others who might be thinking about this, is to tell the stories of the experience of people who have lived with lipodystrophy. These stories were deeply moving to legislators, and they came as a complete surprise to them. And we have people here in Massachusetts, and I'm sure it's the same in other parts of the country, whose lipodystrophy is so profound, they don't leave their homes. They become suicidal. They're depressed. And we pride ourselves here in Massachusetts on, the great response we have to the HIV epidemic. And so I think it was a bit shocking to legislators to see what was happening here, the suffering that people experienced, and combined with the fact that, of course, legislators are always concerned about cost. And, this is a very low-cost bill. The procedures are generally low cost relative to other healthcare procedures. And it's a finite population, unlike other bills to require coverage for treatment of certain conditions where you have ongoing incidence of disease into the future, and what's that going to cost? This is not a recurrent problem because the new medications don't cause lipodystrophy for the most part, and certainly as far as we know. So we could make the case that this is a compassionate response for our longest term survivors of the HIV epidemic, and really packaging it as a historical problem that we can fix. And, it took a lot of work, and there were many things we did along the way, but those are, I think, were the two most important things. These are state-specific issues. We're dealing here with, insurance laws that are state-specific. There are, of course, federal insurance programs like Medicare. And one thing that people should know is that Medicare actually does cover the facial fillers for facial lipoatrophy. The big challenge there that always happens is the reimbursement rates are so low.
Yes.
People have not,
authorization letters. I've been following, we did a lot of advocacy work for Medicare.
Yeah.
It's really gotten worse. I mean, they did first for a while. So the fillers on the Medicare point of view, most doctors don't even bother anymore, to be honest with you.
Right.
So it's been and liposuction, obviously, that's another one, especially for the hump. That's so obvious. People are having not only the depression of looking at themselves and disfigurement of their faces, and not only the neck and the back of the neck, but also pain. And pain, there's nothing cosmetic about pain.
That's right.
So when I heard about you guys, and it took you, 3 years?
Well, this took us 4 years, which actually in legislative life is very fast. I know that seems like a long time to most people, but we've been working on insurance appeals for many years, but 4 years to pass a law, at least in Massachusetts, is very, very rapid time. So that was, we were really fortunate in that regard.
So tell me, so why cannot we do this on the federal level? I know it's complicated. I know the Affordable Care Act, I mean, we have what, how many players? Hundreds. So I know it is not an easy, Medicare is probably the only, I guess, umbrella, and they're not doing that great. How would you, I mean, you've been working, obviously you worked not only in Massachusetts, you've done work in the US Supreme Court. Let's go back. Let's talk about what GLAD does, what your role is, and for future projects like this, not only countrywide, but at the federal level.
Sure. So GLAD, GLBTQ Legal Advocates and Defenders, has been around since 1978. We started our AIDS law project in 1984, so we're one of the earlier AIDS law projects. And our mission is to eradicate discrimination based on sexual orientation, gender identity expression, and HIV status. And we do that mostly through litigation, mostly through impact litigation, cases that will create new precedents. But we do some legislative work, as we did quite in depth here with the lipodystrophy bill. We also do some federal advocacy, but we are mostly based in New England, and so we're not as involved in federal advocacy as some other organizations. Now, you're quite right. I mean, Congress could actually pass a bill that says, you know, every health plan in the country shall have coverage for lipodystrophy. That's just not a political reality that is going to happen. So I do think this is a state issue. And, you know, one of the things that we can do and that I'm hoping to do this fall is actually to put together a playbook, to take all of the materials that we put together in Massachusetts and all of the sort of lessons we've learned and make those readily available to other people. They're certainly all on our website now, glad.org. But we hope to sort of put that together all in a more sort of a compendium book of materials. But I think this really does have to start with state advocacy. And where I think it should begin, and where it really began here, was, you know, we were in a situation where most people with HIV, with lipodystrophy, either were not talking to their doctors about it, or there was just a sort of unspoken assumption between the doctors and the patients, well, this just doesn't get covered. They don't cover this, as if it were this unmovable reality. And I think it was also true that there were some doctors who probably believed, you know, they were so focused on the sort of transformative powers of these first wave of triple combination therapy in the late 1990s, that sort of like, well, you know, doctors are used to thinking, well, these medications saved your life. And of course, all treatments have side effects.
Be grateful to be alive.
Yeah, and just, I think there is a sense that, you know, treatments have side effects. That's just a reality. Yeah. And I think it took a few patients here in Massachusetts to really say, no, this is not okay. And they talked to their doctors and got their doctors more involved. Because I think it has to start with people living with lipodystrophy going to their doctors and saying, I want to pursue this. This is really important to me. Give me a referral to a plastic surgeon and help me fight the insurance companies. And there were a few doctors here in Massachusetts who, you know, really worked intensively with their patients to do insurance appeals with me as a lawyer, but you need the doctors. You need the doctors involved to write letters and so forth.
And those letters, you guys have copies of, obviously, removing any personal information of that content, those letters, right? Because even letters,
that's right. I mean, we can make all that available with, you know, personal identification removed. And because part of demonstrating the problem is actually demonstrating the insurance denials. I mean, there are some people, depending on the state and the insurance company, if they push hard enough in their appeals, and sometimes you need a lawyer to do that, and sometimes you can do that on your own, they'll get coverage. But it's also important to show that insurance companies are in fact denying this coverage in really meritorious cases. You have to hold up examples of the problem. And what we found was that many people, because you know, first of all, it's very hard for people to do an appeal in some circumstances. You know, some people were intimidated. It's not an easy thing to do on your own, but we need some people to push with their doctors, because right now what happened in Massachusetts and what may be happening in other parts of the country is that nobody's pursuing this because it's just taken as a given that it's unavailable. And the first step is for that dynamic to change. and for at least some people to say, no, I'm going to fight my insurance company on this, and the doctor's going to be my ally. And maybe you can get a lawyer through an advocacy organization or legal services to help you. So I think that's the first step. And then, part of it depends on what the advocacy resources are in various states. Because, I know full well that, in Massachusetts, we have done very well with, getting people access to HIV treatment. But there are parts of the country where that is still a struggle. And so it can be very hard for there to be enough advocacy resources to bring to this issue. But I think that the biggest thing is demonstrating the problem, finding people who've been denied, and telling their stories about the impact of lipodystrophy on them. That's the most important step. And then the rest of it is just building the traditional pieces of advocacy around demonstrating low cost, finding support in the medical communities, and all of those steps that are more typically done. But in this case, it was the human stories that transformed this issue into something that when we filed it, most people thought we couldn't get done, to a really viable path that we eventually succeeded at.
Yeah, my nonprofit is called Program for Wellness Restoration, powerusa.org. And obviously it's a small organization, but I was always focused first on wasting syndrome. Then we shifted focus to lipodystrophy back in the days. So we did a lot of the advocacy when it came to getting the drugs approved. And that was an emotional story. We have to actually go to the FDA and present those cases. People got up and made everybody cry. So that's really how these fillers got approved, how the injections at Grifta got approved, a few other things. So we did that the community, actually, I'm very proud we did that. But we actually, after that, we tried to do some Medicare advocacy, and that worked out. And then most of us, I think, got tired. And most of us just gave up. And it is bills like this that kind of reactivate our awareness again, that because some of us are like, damn it, I'm not gonna be able to do this. And the rich kids, men or women that have really good insurance companies are having better luck. But if we provide a toolbox, especially letter writing content, even procedural content, we have this precedent. How important is it to have a precedent for one state? Is that something we can use as activists in other states?
I think it's important. Obviously, it's going to, legislation is so state specific, and what are the particular political and legislative dynamics in any given state. But I think it's helpful to have a state to point to that said, this state did this, and that can serve at least as some springboard in some states to say, gee, we ought to take a look at this issue and address it too. But I think with legislation, I have found that legislation is very labor intensive, and you, in addition to the stories and what I've told, I think the other key is you have to find a lobbyist or a legislative activist in your particular state who really understands the ways of how the state house works, because every place is different, and there are people, in each state who've worked with the LGBT community, the HIV communities, who really have the sort of inside track on how to get something passed in that state. And that's essential. That's essential because, we can't underestimate the importance of both an outside game, meaning people who organize the community, tell the stories, sort of pull together all of the persuasive material. But you also need the insiders in the state houses of your particular state who know how to get things done and what the lay of the land is in that state.
Good. So I guess if we only started by giving the tools, to people, and maybe that's something we, powerusa.org can reactivate again with your help, I hope, or you guys can provide us with some of those materials and we can make them available to everybody, because obviously state to state is going to be a lot of work. It'll probably be easier right now to just empower physicians with content for those letters of appeal.
Right.
I noticed 35 nonprofits signed off and 104 physicians in Massachusetts signed off. So, and they're big names. I went through the whole list. You guys sent me, I basically have like 85 pages of your material. It's
Yeah.
amazing. I'm just blown away. And I feel really bad about it because I worked in lipodystrophy for many years and I just had no idea. I heard in 2013, I heard about this, but I thought it had died off
Yeah.
until recently. And it's like, it blew me away what you guys have done. So thank you so much. You definitely, you guys are, oh, one more thing. Who funds you and how can people send you donations?
Okay. Well, we're a nonprofit, so we raise all of our money through private donations and events. We have a development department, so we never charge clients. We never charge for our work. Our mission is to achieve the end of discrimination for LGBT people and people with HIV. So if people want to support us, they can feel free and go to GLAD.org, GLBTQ Legal Advocates and Defenders. That's certainly something people can do.
And are there other GLAD-like nonprofits out there in other states?
Yes. So we are really modeled. We're as a mostly litigation organization that is modeled on impact litigation. In other words, we're not a direct service provider. We address new issues. We're really very similar to Lambda Legal, which has an HIV project. The ACLU National LGBTQ and HIV projects also do HIV-related litigation. And there are a lot of great, too many to name here, but a lot of great, regionally based organizations that people should be tapping into. There's Whitman Walker in DC that has a legal component. AIDS Law Project of Pennsylvania, the AIDS Project of Chicago, AIDS Law Project there. There's certainly a lot of resources in California. So there is also, if people want attorney referrals to try and find somebody to help them with an appeal or to address this issue, the American Bar Association has an AIDS coordinating committee that is made up of lawyers from around the country who are working on HIV-related issues. So those are sort of a few of the resources that
you're breaking up a little. You froze a little.
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're back. We've done so well.
Okay.
The internet stuff sometimes works with us, and so we've done really well. Well, I really want to thank you for your time, and you definitely have been a hero. It blows my mind how people like you are so committed for so many years. You have not burned out. Like some of us, have that excuse that we're tired and we're burning out. Well, obviously you're not burning out. So thank you. So you want to close the?
No, the other thing I just want to say, and I really should have said it at the beginning, was although GLBTQ Legal Advocates and Defenders was the sort of founder and sort of lead of the Treat Lipodystrophy Coalition, obviously no law can be passed by one organization, and we had a number of wonderful organizations and individuals. AIDS Action Committee of Massachusetts and Carl Shortino, was the original sponsor of this bill, who's a state representative, and then he left the legislature and became the executive director of AIDS Action Committee, so he was really instrumental in this. So many HIV organizations in Massachusetts, and it is important for anybody who wants to do this to put together a coalition of really committed groups. And we're very fortunate in Massachusetts to have a lot of really committed people, including our two co-chairs, who are people living with lipodystrophy who wanted to get involved in this, George Hasty and Andrew Fulham. And I do think it is really important that what made this a success was the people living with lipodystrophy who are willing to come forward. It's a very difficult thing to do for many people, but for those who can, that's essential to success in this arena.
Well, thank you so much. So I will try to, believe it or not, transcribe this and provide all these resources you've mentioned in a list so that people can actually take notes and hopefully we can get your assistance on a little bit of a toolbox. That's how I like to call it.
Absolutely. That's something we'd very much like to do.
Again, this was short notice. The internet actually worked.
Yes.
It was a total surprise to you last night when I told you, I want to do a video. So thank you so much. And hopefully we'll do another interview on the next exciting bill you'll be pushing through, I'm sure. Thank you.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Nelson.
You take care. Bye-bye.